So, have you ever had a kind of career midlife style crisis? And if so, what was that like
Oh, every week.
every week?
I mean, it's a constant almost. No, I think, look, I think all of us have this sort of restlessness within us.
Hmm.
I love to be uncomfortable. And I think it's a great thing to strive for, actually, personally, in one's career, as well as if you're running a company, an organization, a non-profit. You need to have this relentless restlessness about you because the world keeps moving. And if you've found a sweet spot, then it's not going to remain sweet for very long. You know,
Hmm.
that's true. That's always true. And it's one of the principles actually that's been studied and sort of surfaced around the All Blacks rugby team.
Hmm.
You know, it's a national obligation of mine, of course, as a Kiwi, to talk about the All Blacks at some stage. It's sort of in our passport contract. But this is a team of 15 people, both a male and female team, from a country that has a population of 4 million that live there, 3 million when I was growing up, in the bottom of the world, and only half of them play rugby. And they are the most successful rugby team over a 100-year period in history. Not only that, but they're the most successful sporting team of any sport in history. The win rate is something like 70 or 80%. And how can that be true when you've got such a small talent pool to perform at such a consistent level for so long? And one of the principles, a great book by a guy called James Kerr called Legacy. And James studies the All Blacks, as many have. And one of the principles that the All Blacks have is when you're on top of your game, you change your game. So you talk about an existential crossroads. This is the notion of relentless restlessness. You're only as good as the game that you're about to play.
Hmm.
And you're certainly not defined by the one that you had yesterday. And I think that's got to be true of us at a personal and professional level, as well as at a company level. Keep moving.
Yeah, it's a pretty challenging thing to do. So when you're at the top of the game, that's when you need to innovate. That's when you need to change. So
Yeah, because what would the alternative be?
yeah, I mean, you can only stay at the top for so long if the entire landscape around you is shifting and moving anyway, and other people are rising up the ranks.
Right. So if you're not changing when you're on top of the game, you're reacting
Hmm.
to somebody else's.
Yeah.
That's the alternative.
Hmm.
And that's a bad place to be.
Yeah. And what are some of the more kind of challenging periods you've had, if there are examples that you can share? And this could be in investing, it could be, working as a barrister.
Well, I do a lot of investing, and certainly at a startup level, the venture capital business, whether it's small scale angel investing like I do or larger scale fund, is a portfolio game.
Hmm.
The reality is, 8 out of 10 things that you invest in will fail or certainly not succeed wildly, and many you will lose everything on, 100%. You need the one or two that pay off well to, pay back the rest and give you a return on top of that. So I think COVID in particular has tested all of us, hasn't it? It's certainly tested businesses, and there's one business that I invested in that sadly succumbed during COVID. Wound up in it was a solvent wind up in the end, but it was a recruitment business. And of course, you know, people were doing furloughs, they weren't recruiting. And that's hard, that's hard to see an entrepreneur, guy's name's Aidan Kramer, he's a fantastic entrepreneur, have their rug pulled from under them on an
Hmm.
idea that was fundamentally sound, using a technology that was great, and just, shit happens, right?
Yeah.
And you can't control everything. So that's tough.
What was some of the advice you were giving to Aidan at the time?
When the going gets tough in a small business, the number one thing you need to focus on is cash flow. So to begin with, it was practical advice like that, right? You've got to manage the relationship between your burn rate and your income, and manage your runway. And when that runway starts to expire, you've got to call that, hard as that may be, rather than continue, because you can quickly get into a position where you're trading insolvently, which is not a good thing. It's not a good thing from a legal perspective, but more importantly, it's not fair. It's not fair on creditors. It's not fair on employees. So that's really tough, right? And it feels very much like a failure. But paradoxically, I think it's the failures that teach us the most. And experience, if you think about it, is nothing more than a series of failures that you stitch together, or at least the learnings from them. So I think the idea of failing is underrated. Like, you wouldn't set out to fail, but if you're not failing regularly, you're probably not being courageous enough in the risks that you're taking. There's a great educational commentator called Sir Ken Robinson, who sadly died, I think, in 2020. And he said, if you're not prepared to fail, you'll never come up with anything original. How true. So Aidan's gone on to great things, and he is much wealthier in terms of the learning that he's had and the experience that he's had for the failure that he went through, and I went through as an investor. I lost all of my money. Yeah. Okay, but that's the game. That's the game. And, I admire his courage and his entrepreneurial nous, and I'd invest in him again in a heartbeat.
Wow. It's interesting, because within entrepreneurship, people talk about failure really often and how failure is a good thing. But then when you see it right in front of you, it must feel like, it's so close to you. You've put your money into it. You've put so much of your time coaching this person and advising them.
Yeah.
Like, that must feel like a real challenge.
Yeah, there's a few things like that in life, aren't there? Like I felt at one stage that running the London Marathon would be a great thing to do. It felt awful at the time, certainly after I hit the wall around London Bridge or Tower Bridge with dehydration, because I wasn't managing that properly. It just felt terrible.
Oh, was that around mile 16, 17?
Yep. Yeah. You've done it. You've done a marathon.
It was not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun, but it feels good afterwards. A sports massage, much the same. Oh, must have a sports massage, would be good for you. Well, it feels really bad at the time. But it's good for you. And I think life's a little bit like that. And, it's the failures that move us forward. If we did it right to begin with, we already knew it.